Racist cop Tases black mom and child. Not knowing her husband is the police chief, a routine encounter becomes a harrowing ordeal for a mother and her child. But the officer's actions will lead to revelations no one saw coming. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The spring afternoon at Cedar Grove Community Park started like any other. Jamila Carter sat on a weathered wooden bench, watching her teenage son Malik practice his basketball shots at the nearby court. The sun cast dappled shadows through the maple trees, and the gentle breeze carried the sounds of children playing nearby. Malik's laughter echoed across the court as he demonstrated a new move he'd learned, his sneakers squeaking against the pavement. "Mom, watch this," Malik called out, executing a perfect layup. His natural athleticism reminded Jamila of Samuel in his younger days. She smiled, thinking about their upcoming weekend plans for Malik's basketball tournament. "That's fantastic, honey. Keep working on that form," Jamila responded, checking her watch. They had about an hour before they needed to head home to prepare dinner. Samuel was supposed to join them later, after his shift at the police station. The peaceful scene shattered when Officer Derek Hargrove's patrol car pulled up to the park's entrance. He stepped out, his hand already resting on his belt, scanning the area with calculated intensity. Jamila noticed him immediately, her maternal instincts kicking in as she observed his aggressive posture. She'd heard stories about Hargrove from other community members, none of them good. Hargrove approached them with purposeful strides, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Ma'am, sir, we've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," he announced, his voice carrying an edge that made Jamila's skin crawl. "We're just enjoying the park, officer," Jamila responded calmly, standing up. She gestured toward Malik, who had stopped playing and was now walking toward them, basketball tucked under his arm. "My son and I have been here for about an hour." Hargrove's hand tightened on his belt. "I'm going to need to see some identification." His eyes darted between them suspiciously, despite their casual athletic wear and the obvious mother-son resemblance. "May I ask why?" Jamila questioned, maintaining her composure while reaching for her purse. "We haven't done anything wrong." "Don't question my authority, ma'am," Hargrove snapped, his other hand moving to his taser. "Your son matches the description of a suspect we're looking for." Malik stepped closer to his mother, confusion and fear evident on his face. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Everything happened in a blur after that. Hargrove interpreted Malik's movement as threatening, drawing his taser in one fluid motion. "Stop right there," he barked, but before either Carter could respond, he fired. The crackling sound of electricity filled the air as both Jamila and Malik collapsed to the ground, their bodies convulsing from the taser's impact. Jamila's scream pierced the peaceful afternoon, drawing the attention of nearby parkgoers who began running toward the scene, phones already recording. Malik lay on the ground, tears streaming down his face, his basketball rolling away across the court. Jamila, fighting through the pain, tried to reach for her son, but found her muscles wouldn't respond properly. The voltage had left them both temporarily paralyzed. Hargrove stood over them, taser still aimed, speaking into his radio with cold efficiency. "Dispatch, I've got 2 suspects subdued at Cedar Grove Park. Requesting backup." He seemed unmoved by the growing crowd of horrified onlookers, some shouting in protest at the obvious excessive force. The peaceful spring day had transformed into a nightmare, with mother and son lying helpless on the ground, victims of unwarranted police aggression. The incident would soon spark a chain of events that would shake Cedar Grove to its core, testing loyalties, challenging relationships, and forcing the community to confront its deep-seated prejudices. Samuel Carter sat in his office at the Cedar Grove Police Department, reviewing budget reports during what should have been a routine afternoon. The polished nameplate on his desk reflected his position as chief of police, a role he'd worked 20 years to achieve. Family photos lined his desk, snapshots of happier times with Jamila and Malik at various milestones and celebrations. The crackle of his radio shattered his concentration. "Dispatch to all units. Officers requesting backup at Cedar Grove Park. 2 suspects subdued. Situation under control." Samuel's blood ran cold as he recognized the location. the same park where Jamila and Malik were supposed to be spending the afternoon. His office phone rang immediately after. Detective Rodriguez's voice came through, tense and hesitant. "Chief, you need to get to the park. Now! It's your family." Samuel's chair crashed against the wall as he stood abruptly, his hands shaking as he grabbed his keys. The 3-minute drive to the park felt like hours. His mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. He'd always feared something like this might happen, the intersection of his professional and personal lives colliding in the worst possible way. As he pulled up to the park, lights flashing but sirens silent, the scene unfolded before him like a nightmare. A crowd had gathered, phones raised, recording everything. Through the sea of onlookers, he spotted Jamila and Malik on the ground, with Officer Hargrove standing over them, tasers still drawn. Samuel's training warred with his instincts as a husband and father. He stepped out of his vehicle, forcing himself to move with measured authority rather than the panic threatening to overwhelm him. "Officer Hargrove," he called out, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Stand down." Hargrove didn't lower his weapon. "Chief, I've got 2 suspects who match the description of Dash. That's my wife and son." Samuel cut him off, each word precise and sharp. The crowd fell silent. The only sound the whir of phone cameras capturing the confrontation. "Sir, I was following protocol. They were resisting Dash. I said stand down, officer." Samuel moved between Hargrove and his family, his back straight, his badge catching the afternoon sun. He could hear Malik's soft sobs behind him, could sense Jamila's anger and fear radiating like heat. The moment stretched taut as a wire as Hargrove hesitated, his fingers still on the taser's trigger. Other officers began arriving, creating a perimeter around the scene. Samuel could feel their eyes on him, watching how their chief would handle this situation. His authority, his integrity, his very identity, everything hung in the balance. Finally, Hargrove lowered his weapon, but his defiant stance spoke volumes. "I'll need to file a report," he said, his voice carrying a challenge. "You'll do more than that," Samuel responded, his tone glacial. "Turn in your badge and gun. You're on administrative leave pending investigation." As paramedics rushed forward to attend to Jamila and Malik, Samuel knelt beside them, trying to maintain his professional demeanor even as his heart shattered. Jamila's eyes met his, filled with pain and accusation. This was the department he led, the system he devoted his life to, turning against his own family. The crowd continued to record, their phones capturing every moment of this pivotal scene. Samuel knew that by nightfall, this incident would be viral, forcing Cedar Grove to confront issues it had long ignored. His position as chief of police had always been a source of pride. Now it felt like a weight threatening to drown him. As he helped Jamila to her feet, supporting her trembling form, Samuel realized that this was just the beginning. He would have to choose between the brotherhood he'd sworn to protect and the family he loved. The line between right and wrong, once so clear to him, had become hopelessly blurred. The fluorescent lights of Cedar Grove Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across the emergency room waiting area. Samuel sat rigid in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his police uniform feeling like a stranger's clothes against his skin. The steady beep of medical equipment and hushed conversations of hospital staff created a somber backdrop to his churning thoughts. Down the hall, Jamila was being examined for potential cardiac complications from the taser. Malik sat beside Samuel, holding an ice pack to his bruised shoulder, his usual vibrant energy replaced by a hollow silence. The boy hadn't made eye contact with his father since they arrived. "Chief Carter," a nurse approached with clipboard in hand. "Your wife is asking for you." Samuel found Jamila propped up in a hospital bed, electrodes monitoring her heart rhythm. The sight of her hospital gown and the angry red marks from the taser made his stomach clench. Her eyes, usually warm and loving, now held a coldness he'd never seen before. "How long have you known?" Jamila's voice was hoarse but steady. "Known what?" "About Derek Hargrove. About his history of excessive force." "Don't pretend you didn't know, Samuel. I've heard the whispers in our community for years." Samuel sank into the chair beside her bed, his badge suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. There were complaints, but nothing stuck. No formal charges were ever dashed. Nothing stuck because people like you protected him. Jamila cut him off. How many other mothers and sons has he attacked? How many times have you looked the other way because it wasn't your family? The truth of her words hit him like physical blows. His phone buzzed continuously in his pocket. Probably the mayor, the media, internal affairs, but he couldn't bring himself to check it. I never thought, he began. That's the problem, isn't it? You never thought it would happen to us. Being the chief's family was supposed to protect us. But that badge you wear? It didn't stop Derek from seeing us as threats. It didn't stop him from hurting your son. The heart monitor beeped steadily, marking the heavy silence between them. Outside the room, Samuel could hear Malik talking quietly with a social worker, describing the incident. Each word that filtered through the door felt like an indictment. His phone rang again, and this time he recognized his father's ringtone. Robert Carter, 30 years on the force before retiring, had been Samuel's role model, the reason he'd become a cop. Samuel answered, stepping into the hallway. Son, what the hell are you doing? His father's voice carried decades of authority. You suspended one of your best officers without cause. The union's already involved. Without cause? He attacked my family. He was responding to a suspicious person's call. Following procedure. You're letting personal feelings cloud your judgment. Remember what I taught you. The badge comes first. Samuel watched through the window as a nurse checked Jamila's vitals. Maybe that's been the problem all along, Dad. Maybe the badge shouldn't come first. Don't throw away everything you've worked for over one incident. You have responsibilities, Samuel ended the call, his hand shaking. Returning to Jamila's room, he found her staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I don't know if I can trust you anymore, she whispered. Every time you put on that uniform, every time you defend that department, how can I believe you're still the man I married? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered. Outside, protesters were beginning to gather, their chants barely audible through the hospital windows. Signs demanding justice bobbed above the crowd, and news vans were pulling into the parking lot. Samuel reached for Jamila's hand, but she pulled away. In that simple gesture, he felt the magnitude of what had been broken, not just their trust, but their entire world. The safe, ordered life they'd built in Cedar Grove had shattered the moment Derek Hargrove pulled that trigger. I'll make this right, he promised, though he had no idea how. No, Jamila replied, her voice stronger now. We'll make this right, but first, you need to decide which side you're really on. The hospital room transformed into an unexpected hub of resistance over the next few days. Maya Johnson, a civil rights attorney and Jamila's college roommate, arrived like a force of nature, her designer briefcase packed with legal documents and her mind already mapping out their battle strategy. This isn't just about you and Malik anymore, Maya explained, spreading papers across Jamila's hospital tray table. Your case could be the catalyst we need to expose systemic problems in Cedar Grove PD. Her fingers flew across her laptop keyboard as she spoke, documenting everything. Jamila sat upright in her bed, finally free of the heart monitors. The physical pain from the taser had subsided, but the emotional trauma remained raw. I kept quiet before, Maya. I thought being married to the chief meant I had to support the system, even when I saw its flaws. And now I want everyone to know what happened. Not just to us, but to everyone who's been afraid to speak up. Maya's organization had already scheduled a community meeting at the First Baptist Church for that evening. The irony wasn't lost on Jamila. The same church where she and Samuel had renewed their vows 5 years ago would now host the beginning of their greatest challenge. Across town, Samuel sat through a tense meeting with the police commission. The department's conference room felt suffocating, filled with stern faces and barely concealed hostility. Commissioner Wallace leaned forward, his jowls quivering with barely suppressed anger. Do you understand the position you've put us in, Carter? Officer Hargrove's union rep is already crying foul. They're claiming you're letting personal bias interfere with department operations. A man tasered my wife and child without cause, Samuel responded, his voice tight with control. Are you suggesting I should ignore that? We're suggesting you recuse yourself from the investigation. Deputy Commissioner Zhang interjected smoothly. Let internal affairs handle this through proper channels. Show the public we can police our own. Samuel almost laughed at the phrase police our own. How many times had he used those same words to reassure concerned citizens? Now they felt hollow, a bureaucratic shield for institutional failure. That evening, the First Baptist Church overflowed with community members. Maya stood at the pulpit, her professional demeanor commanding attention. Jamila sat in the front row, Malik beside her, their presence a living testimony to police brutality. What happened to the Carters could happen to any of us, Maya declared, her voice carrying to the rafters. How many other incidents have gone unreported because victims feared retaliation? How many officers like Derek Hargrove are still patrolling our streets? The crowd responded with murmurs of agreement and shared stories. One by one, people stood to recount their own experiences with police harassment and discrimination. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a devastating picture of systemic abuse. Jamila listened, her heart heavy with each new story. These were her neighbors, people she'd passed in grocery stores and school functions, carrying silent burdens of fear and distrust. The weight of their shared experience pressed against her chest, replacing her personal pain with something larger, a sense of purpose. Through it all, Maya documented everything, building their case piece by piece. We're not just filing a complaint, she explained to the gathering. We're demanding a complete review of department policies, training procedures, and disciplinary records. The time for half measures is over. The meeting stretched late into the night, evolving into an impromptu organizing session. Committees formed, responsibilities were assigned, and a strategy began to take shape. Maya's legal expertise merged with grassroots activism, creating a powerful framework for change. As the crowd finally dispersed, Jamila stood in the church doorway, watching her neighbors leave with renewed determination in their steps. Maya approached, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready for this?" Maya asked softly. "Once we file the formal complaints, there's no turning back. It could get ugly." Jamila thought of Samuel, probably still at the station, trapped between loyalty to his department and love for his family. She thought of Malik, who now flinched at the sight of police cars. She thought of all the stories she'd heard tonight, each one a thread in a larger tapestry of injustice. "I'm ready," she answered. "Cedar Grove needs to change. If it takes my family's story to make that happen, then so be it." The next few weeks transformed Cedar Grove from a quiet suburban town into a battleground of competing narratives. Local news vans became permanent fixtures outside the police station, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical trees. Social media exploded with cell phone footage of the park incident, each share and retweet amplifying the community's outrage. Jamila found herself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. Maya had helped arrange an interview with a national news network, and the footage of Jamila describing the attack, her voice steady despite her tears, went viral overnight. "My husband leads the department that attacked his own family," she said into the camera. "If we're not safe, who is?" The interview sparked a firestorm. Protesters began gathering daily outside the police station, their signs demanding justice for the Carters and end police brutality. Maya orchestrated the media strategy masterfully, ensuring their message remained focused on systemic change rather than personal vengeance. Inside the station, Samuel faced growing hostility from his officers. The break room fell silent whenever he entered. Casual conversations ended abruptly. Even his most trusted lieutenants avoided eye contact in the hallways. "You're choosing outsiders over your own men," Detective Martinez confronted him one morning, voice low but intense. "We put our lives on the line every day, and you're letting your wife paint us all as monsters." "This isn't about taking sides," Samuel tried to explain. "It's about accountability." "Bullshit," Martinez spat. "You're either with us or against us. There's no middle ground anymore, Chief." The division within the department deepened when several officers requested transfers to other precincts. Their departure paperwork cited loss of confidence in leadership as the reason. Each resignation felt like a personal failure to Samuel. even as he questioned whether their loyalty had been to justice or to a broken system. Meanwhile, Jamila and Maya's activism gained momentum. They organized workshops on knowing your rights, documented other instances of police misconduct, and built a network of community advocates. Local business owners began displaying "Stand with the Carters" posters in their windows, despite warnings from police union representatives about slower response times to their neighborhoods. The pressure took its toll on the family. Malik's grades began to slip, and his basketball coach reported he seemed distracted during practice. One evening, Samuel found him sitting alone in the backyard, staring at his phone. "Some of my teammates unfriended me," Malik said without looking up. "Their dads are cops. They say I'm anti-police now." Samuel sat beside his son, feeling the weight of worlds colliding. "You're not anti-police, son. You're pro-justice. There's a difference." "Is there?" Malik finally met his father's eyes. "Mom's out there every day, saying the whole system is corrupt. And you're still wearing that uniform. How can both things be true?" Before Samuel could answer, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The police union had called an emergency meeting. Their statement to the press was unequivocal. Chief Carter's personal conflict has compromised his ability to lead. The union unanimously votes no confidence in his leadership. The news hit local channels within hours. Footage of union representatives calling for Samuel's resignation played on loop, interspersed with clips of Jamila's interviews and protest footage. Cedar Grove's quiet streets became a symbolic battlefield in a national conversation about police reform. That night, as Samuel watched his wife prepare for another community meeting, he felt the distance between them like a physical barrier. Jamila caught his reflection in the mirror as she applied her lipstick, armor of a different kind. "They're calling for your resignation," she said quietly. "I know. What are you going to do?" Samuel loosened his tie, the weight of his badge heavy against his chest. "I don't know anymore, Jamila. Every choice feels wrong. If I stand with the department, I betray you and Malik. If I stand with you, I abandon every oath I've ever taken." "Maybe it's time to take a new oath," Jamila suggested, turning to face him. "One to justice rather than institutions." The sound of protesters could be heard through their windows, their chants carrying on the evening air. Tomorrow would bring more demonstrations, more media coverage, more pressure from all sides. The comfortable life they'd built in Cedar Grove was unraveling thread by thread. But in the midst of the chaos, a new understanding began to form between them. This wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about every family that had suffered in silence, every officer who'd chosen loyalty over integrity, every community torn apart by the same conflicts playing out in their home. The Internal Affairs conference room felt like a pressure cooker, its windowless walls holding secrets that had festered for years. Samuel sat across from Investigator Chun, a stack of personnel files between them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on decades of departmental history. "Let's start with Officer Hargrove's record," Chun began, opening the top file. 17 complaints of excessive force in 8 years, all dismissed or marked unfounded. She looked up at Samuel, her expression carefully neutral. "As chief, you signed off on most of these dismissals." Samuel's throat tightened. "I trusted the internal review process. I believed my commanders when they said the complaints were baseless." "Or perhaps," Chin suggested, sliding another document across the table, "it was easier to believe that than to confront the truth." The document was a statistical analysis of Cedar Grove PD's use of force incidents. The patterns were unmistakable. Certain officers, Hargrove among them, had disproportionately high rates of violent encounters, particularly with minorities. The data had been there all along, buried in routine reports Samuel had skimmed and signed. "There's more," Chin continued, producing more files. "We've uncovered a pattern of informal warnings between officers. When complaints were filed, certain officers would visit the complainants. Not threats, exactly, but friendly advice about the difficulty of winning cases against police." Each revelation felt like another brick added to the weight on Samuel's shoulders. He recognized names in the reports, officers he'd promoted, commanders he'd trusted, cases he'd closed without deeper investigation. His own signature appeared page after page, a damning testament to his complicity. "The deeper we dig," Chen said, "the worse it gets. Officers covering for each other, evidence disappearing. From lockup, body camera footage conveniently corrupted. This isn't just about Derek Hargrove anymore, Chief. This is about a culture of impunity that you helped maintain." Samuel's hands clenched under the table. "What do you want from me?" "The truth. All of it. Names, dates, incidents. Everything you've seen or suspected over the years. The department is under federal scrutiny now. This could end careers, including yours." The choice before him was stark. He could protect the system he'd served, maintaining the blue wall of silence that had defined his career. Or he could tear it all down, exposing not just individual wrongdoing, but the institutional rot that had allowed it to flourish. Hours passed as Samuel detailed everything he knew. He named officers who'd falsified reports, commanders who'd buried complaints, unions reps who'd intimidated witnesses. Each admission felt like betrayal and liberation simultaneously. "One last thing," Chen said as their session drew to a close. "We found this in Hargrove's personal locker." She produced a small notebook, its pages filled with dates and crude tallies. "He kept score, Chief. Every time he used force, every person he subdued. Like it was a game." Samuel felt bile rise in his throat. How many of those tallies represented innocent people like Jamila and Malik? How many families had been traumatized while he looked the other way? Leaving the interview room, Samuel found himself in the station's main hallway. Photos of past chiefs lined the walls, including his father's stern portrait. Their eyes seemed to follow him, judging his decision to break ranks. But for the first time since the incident, Samuel felt something close to peace. His phone buzzed, a message from Jamila. "Maya found more victims willing to testify. We're building something bigger than we imagined. Are you still with us?" Standing beneath his father's portrait, Samuel typed his response. "All the way. No matter what it costs." The truth would destroy careers, shatter relationships, and reshape Cedar Grove's power structure. But as Samuel walked through the station that had been his second home, he realized some things needed to be destroyed before they could be rebuilt. The day of the protest dawned clear and cold, with tension hanging thick in the autumn air. Cedar Grove's main square had transformed overnight into a sea of signs and banners. Jamila stood at the center of it all, her voice amplified by a megaphone as she addressed the growing crowd. "Today, we march not just for my family, but for every family that has lived in fear." The crowd responded with thunderous approval. Maya stood beside her, coordinating with legal observers in bright yellow vests who would document any confrontations. Across the street, the police station resembled a fortress. Officers in riot gear formed a perimeter, their faces hidden behind tinted visors. Samuel watched from his office window, noting familiar stances among the armored figures below. Officers he'd trained, deputies he'd promoted, all now preparing to face off against their chief's wife. His radio crackled. "Chief, the crowd is approaching department parameters. Permission to establish a hard line?" Before Samuel could respond, a new voice cut in. "Captain Reynolds, the tactical commander. All units maintain position. Use chemical deterrence if the crowd becomes hostile." Samuel grabbed his radio. "Negative. No chemical agents without my direct order." But even as he spoke, he saw officers below donning gas masks. The protest moved like a living organism toward the station. Jamila and Maya led from the front, their chants echoing off downtown buildings. No justice, no peace, no racist police. Everything unraveled in an instant. Someone from the crowd threw a water bottle. An officer responded with pepper spray. The peaceful march dissolved into chaos as protesters retreated and advanced like waves against the police line. Through it all, cameras rolled touring every moment for national news. Samuel rushed downstairs, pushing through the station doors just as a second wave of confrontation began. He saw Jamila still at the front, Maya trying to pull her back as officers advanced with batons raised. "Stand down." Samuel's voice boomed across the square. "All officers, stand down." But Captain Reynolds was already giving contrary orders. "Push them back. Clear the square." The confusion in the chain of command created a dangerous vacuum. Some officers retreated while others advanced, creating gaps in the line. Protesters surged forward into these spaces, leading to direct confrontations. Samuel fought his way through the chaos, trying to reach Jamila. He saw her go down in the crowd, Maya bending to protect her. The sight of his wife falling triggered something primal in him. Without thinking, he stripped off his badge and gun belt, letting them clatter to the ground. "Enough," he roared, placing himself between the protesters and the police line. "This ends now." The square fell eerily quiet. Officers stared in disbelief at their chief, standing with the protesters. Cameras swiveled to capture the moment. Samuel helped Jamila to her feet, checking her for injuries. "Your own chief stands with them," someone shouted. "What does that tell you?" Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his voice cold. "Chief Carter, you need to return to the station immediately." "No," Samuel replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm done choosing sides. This isn't about sides anymore. This is about right and wrong." The standoff lasted several tense minutes. Finally, Mayor Thompson arrived, having been summoned by panicked city council members. She surveyed the scene, protesters and police frozen in tableau, the chief of police standing with demonstrators, national media capturing every moment. "Both sides will stand down," she announced through a bullhorn. "Chief Carter, Captain Reynolds, my office. Now, the rest of you, clear the square peacefully or face arrest." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Samuel caught Jamila's eye. No words were needed. They both knew this moment had changed everything. The line between his two worlds hadn't just been crossed, it had been erased entirely. The Cedar Grove Police Department press room had never seen such a crowd. National networks jostled with local stations for position, cameras trained on the empty podium bearing the department seal. The air buzzed with speculation. After the dramatic confrontation in the square, everyone knew this press conference would be explosive. Mayor Thompson entered first, her usual polished demeanor showing signs of strain. Behind her came Samuel, still in uniform but without his badge, and the city council members, their faces grim. The camera flashes created a strobing effect that made the scene feel surreal. "Good afternoon," the mayor began. "In light of recent events, Chief Carter has asked to address the public directly. I want to emphasize that his statements today are his own and do not necessarily reflect the official position of this administration." Samuel stepped to the podium, the weight of countless eyes upon him. Through the sea of reporters, he spotted Jamila and Maya in the back, watching intently. The prepared statement in his pocket felt inadequate for the moment. "8 days ago, my wife and son were assaulted by one of my officers," he began, his voice steady. "Since then, I've discovered evidence of systematic abuse of power within this department. Officers protecting officers. Complaints buried. Victims silenced." The room erupted with questions. Samuel raised his hand for silence. "As chief of police, I bear responsibility for these failures. Every dismissed complaint crossed my desk. Every covered-up incident happened under my watch. I told myself I was protecting the department, maintaining order. Instead, I was perpetuating injustice." In the back, Jamila pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Maya squeezed her shoulder supportively. "Today, I'm releasing all internal investigation files related to Officer Hargrove and similar complaints over the past decade. These documents show a pattern of misconduct that goes beyond any single incident or officer. They reveal a culture of impunity that I helped create and maintain." Captain Reynolds, standing at the back of the room, stormed out. Several other officers followed. The remaining crowd pressed closer, sensing history in the making. "This isn't just about police brutality," Samuel continued. "It's about trust. It's about power. It's about who we serve and protect, and who we fail. Cedar Grove deserves better than what we've given them." The questions came rapid fire. "Chief, are you resigning? Will there be criminal charges? What about the police union's vote of no confidence? Are you concerned about retaliation?" Samuel addressed each question directly, no longer hiding behind bureaucratic language or policy shields. As he spoke, social media exploded with clips and quotes. Hashtag Cedar Grove Confession began trending nationally. Outside, the division in the community played out in real time. Police supporters clashed with reform advocates. Local businesses closed early, fearing unrest. The town that had prided itself on being anywhere USA had become ground zero for a national conversation about police accountability. After the press conference, Samuel found Jamila waiting in his office. She stood by his desk, holding the family photo that had sat there for years. Their smiling faces preserved in a moment before everything changed. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "Yes, I did." He loosened his tie, suddenly exhausted. "I've been two different people for too long. The chief who protected the system and the husband who loved his family. I couldn't live with that divide anymore." His phone buzzed constantly with messages, support, threats, demands for interviews. Through his window, he could see news vans still parked outside, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern totems. "The town's going to need time to heal," Jamila said, replacing the photo on his desk. "People are angry on both sides." "Let them be angry," Samuel replied. "Anger means they're paying attention. Maybe that's what we needed all along." The Cedar Grove Municipal Building's main chamber buzzed with tension as Samuel prepared to present his comprehensive reform proposal. The room was packed beyond capacity. Community members, police officers, city officials, and media representatives all crowded together in an uneasy assembly. Jamila and Maya sat in the front row, surrounded by their growing coalition of activists and advocates. On the opposite side, a contingent of uniformed officers watched with crossed arms and stern expressions. The physical divide in the room mirrored the larger split in the community. Samuel stood at the podium, his presentation materials ready but untouched. "Before I outline the proposed changes," he began, "I want to share something personal. Last night, my son Malik asked me if I regretted becoming a police officer." The room fell silent, attention fixed on his words. "I told him no. I became an officer to serve and protect ideals I still believe in. What I regret is forgetting that those ideals require constant vigilance, not just against crime, but against our own worst instincts." He clicked to the first slide, displaying statistics from the internal investigation. These numbers tell a story of systematic failure, but they also show us a path forward. The proposed reforms were comprehensive: mandatory body cameras with civilian oversight of footage, an independent review board for use of force incidents, revised training protocols focusing on de-escalation, and a community liaison program that would pair officers with local leaders for regular dialogue. "This isn't about punishing police," he emphasized, noting the tens. Ion from his former colleagues. "It's about rebuilding trust. Every officer who truly believes in protecting and serving should welcome these changes." Maya stood up, her legal expertise adding weight to her words. "We've reviewed similar programs in other cities. The data shows that these reforms protect both officers and civilians. When communities trust their police, everyone is safer." The discussion that followed was heated but productive. Officers raised concerns about their safety and authority. Community members shared stories of past mistreatment. For the first time, both sides were truly listening to each other. One veteran officer, Sergeant Martinez, surprised everyone by speaking up. "I've been on the force 20 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Watched good cops become bitter, watched trust erode year by year. Maybe it's time we tried something new." As the meeting progressed, small breakthroughs emerged. A community youth program leader offered to help with cultural sensitivity training. A senior officer suggested regular town halls where citizens could voice concerns directly to department leadership. Even some of Samuel's strongest critics began engaging constructively with the proposals. Jamila rose to address the chamber, her presence commanding respect. "My family's trauma brought us here, but this isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no other family goes through what we did. These reforms are a beginning, not an end." The city council voted to establish a committee to implement the reforms, with representation from both law enforcement and community groups. Maya would serve as legal counsel, ensuring the changes met both constitutional requirements and community needs. After the meeting, Samuel found himself surrounded by a mix of officers and activists, all wanting to contribute to the path forward. The conversations were awkward at times, but genuine. Old barriers began to crack, if not completely fall. "You're walking a tightrope," Maya told him privately, pushing for change while keeping enough of the department on board to make it work. "Sometimes the hardest path is the only right one," he replied, watching Jamila deep in conversation with a group of young officers. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. That takes time and patience." The local newspaper's headline the next day read, "Cedar Grove charts new course in police-community relations." It wasn't as sensational as the earlier crisis coverage, but it represented something more important: hope for real, lasting change. The county courthouse stood imposing against the gray winter sky as the trial of Officer Derek Hargrove began. The case had drawn national attention, with media outlets framing it as a watershed moment in police accountability. The gallery was packed with observers from both sides of the divide: police reform advocates and law enforcement supporters, all watching intently as justice played out. Jamila sat in the witness box, her voice steady as she recounted the day in the park. "I saw the taser pointed at my son, and in that moment, I wasn't the chief's wife. I was just another mother watching her child being threatened by someone who had sworn to protect us." The prosecution had built a meticulous case. Maya's thorough investigation had uncovered a pattern of similar incidents throughout Hargrove's career. One by one, previous victims took the stand, their stories forming a damning mosaic of abuse of power. Samuel's testimony proved to be the turning point. As he approached the witness stand, still in his chief's uniform, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Officer Hargrove's actions that day weren't an aberration, he testified. They were the product of a system that prioritized power over protection, force over justice. "As a superior, I failed to stop this pattern. As a father and husband, I watched it hurt my family. As chief of police, I'm here to ensure it never happened." Pens again. The defense tried to paint Hargrove as a dedicated officer following procedure, but the evidence was overwhelming. His own notebook, with its callous tallying of force incidents, proved particularly damaging when presented to the jury. During closing arguments, the prosecutor stood before the jury, Hargrove's notebook in hand. "This isn't just about one incident in a park. This is about what happens when we give power without accountability, authority without oversight." Officer Hargrove didn't just betray the Carters. He betrayed his badge and everything it's supposed to represent. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the courthouse fell silent as the verdict was read: guilty on all counts. As Hargrove was led away in handcuffs, Samuel watched his former officer's departure with mixed emotions. The conviction represented justice, but also a failure of leadership that had allowed things to reach this point. Outside the courthouse, Jamila addressed the waiting media, Maya and Samuel standing supportively beside her. "Today's verdict is just the beginning," she declared. "Real change comes from preventing these incidents, not just punishing them after the fact." The reforms in Cedar Grove were already showing promise. The new Civilian Oversight Board had begun its work, body camera footage was being regularly reviewed, and community engagement programs were building bridges between officers and residents. Later that evening, the Carter family gathered in their living room, the TV news still replaying clips from the trial. Malik, who had been quiet throughout the proceedings, finally spoke up. "Dad," he said, "remember when you told me being a good officer meant protecting people?" Samuel nodded, uncertain where his son was heading. "I think I understand now. Sometimes protecting people means standing up to other officers. Sometimes it means changing the whole system." Jamila reached across the couch, taking Samuel's hand. The past months had tested their relationship, but had also forged something stronger, a shared commitment to justice that transcended personal comfort and institutional loyalty. "Cedar Grove will never be the same," Maya observed from her seat by the window, watching protesters and supporters finally dispersing from the courthouse steps. "Good," Jamila replied. Change was long overdue. Samuel looked at his badge, still sitting on the coffee table. It caught the evening light, gleaming with renewed purpose. "The hard work starts now," he said, "making sure this verdict leads to lasting change, not just here, but everywhere." Outside, the sun set on a transformed Cedar Grove. The town had become a symbol of both the challenges and possibilities of police reform. The Carter family's ordeal had opened wounds that had festered for generations, but in doing so, had also created space for healing and renewal. The story of Cedar Grove would be told in police academies and community meetings across the country, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a roadmap for change. It proved that justice, though sometimes painful in its arrival, was always worth the fight.